The fourth and final panel of today is on the more uplifting theme of disagreeing well, civility and its limits. And we have 5 panelists for this one. So we have, on my left, Felice Baspol, who's a history student at Trinity College Dublin and a Living Freedom Project assistant at Ideas Matter, which is an organisation that runs debates with students all around the country. We have Teresa Bejan, who's Professor of Political Theory at Oxford, focusing on the history of debates about free speech, civility and tolerance. Simon Cullen, who is Visiting Research Professor of Civil Discourse and Artificial Intelligence at the University of North Carolina. Ellie M. Noam, Professor of Finance and Economics at Columbia Business School, with a particular interest in the impact of digital technologies on the media, and also co-chair of the Columbia Academic Freedom Council, and Kathleen Stock, a philosopher and writer with a weekly column in Unheard. Right, so the theme of our panel is disagreeing well, civility and its limits. It's often said that legal protections on free speech are not sufficient. We want harmonious, fruitful conversations with people we disagree with, and for that certain virtues are necessary. Virtues of tolerance and civility, and perhaps particularly in universities. So to quote some recent remarks of Oxford Vice-Chancellor Professor Irene Tracy, we did invite her, by the way, but she couldn't come. These were just made a few days ago. Students, said Tracy, are struggling with issues around free speech and what's appropriate to say, even if it's within the letter of the law. Words matter and have an effect on people. Kindness, courtesy and respect are things we have to remind and educate our students about. Now, that all sounds unexceptionable, even banal. I mean, who isn't in favour of kindness, courtesy and respect? The trouble is, as we know, that these words are often used as devices to exclude certain positions which are deemed to be inherently unkind or disrespectful. So, be kind means, translated, agree with me or shut up. Now, these debates are not new, are they? I mean, perhaps the word kindness wasn't used so much, but the word civility was often used instead. And there's been a debate about civility that stretches back to at least the 17th century, and Teresa Bejan has written an excellent book about this, Mere Civility. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of debate about the concept of civility and how it's been used, but also questioned as exclusive and.
Right. Hello. Well, the idea of civility is a really ancient idea. The English word civility derives from the Latin quilitas. So this idea of civility as the behavior or the virtue becoming of a citizen. So a member of the civitas is a kind of law-governed and settled community. So again, very ancient Roman idea. But what happens in the early modern periods, so especially in the context of the Reformation, is there's a kind of renewed interest and concern about civility as the bond of societies that are in the midst of this religious upheaval in which the bond of religion is breaking down. So it used to be thought that, well, you know, the civitas is brought together by a sort of a unity of religious communion. We all go to church together, we take the sacraments together, but all of a sudden sort of these Protestants won't shut up, and they're making all of our disagreements very salient. And so civility then sort of becomes this secular bond of, well, we might not need to be able to agree on religious truths, to regard each other as fellow Christians and have this bonding of charity. Instead, could we have a bond of civility, which means something like, well, conforming to the culturally contingent standards of respectful behavior, that it enables us to kind of get along together, to share a life even if we don't share a faith. So in my book, I talk about the sort of early modern way of thinking about a crisis of civility in response to technological revolutions like the inventing of the printing press as actually explaining quite a lot of our sense of contemporary civility crisis on the back of the internet or social media.
Thank you. And you've, in that book, you defend a minimalist conception of civility, don't you, which you call mere civility, quoting Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island. Could you tell us a little bit more about what mere civility means and why you prefer it to more robust notions of civility?
Right. So I've just given an answer wearing my historian's hat, so I'll sort of put on my philosopher and political theorist hat. I mean, I'm interested in the ways that civility is a conversational virtue that's meant to be pertinent, not simply to sort of the conversations we're having now, but just pertinent in particular to disagreement. So civility is something that's meant to allow us to keep our disagreements peaceable. To be able to tolerate the fact that we disagree. And so civility is a kind of disciplining of speech relevant to disagreement. So in that way, it's a conversational virtue akin to politeness or akin to courtesy, as my vice chancellor sort of suggests. But it's crucially not the same, because to be uncivil is to be much worse than being impolite. It's much worse than being discourteous. It's the uncivil sort of puts themselves beyond the pale in a way. It sort of says that they are unwilling to conform to the kind of minimal standards we expect by a member of our civil society or state. So I like to think of mere civility as a virtue of minimal conformity to the rules of respectful behavior that's often compatible with expression, with contempt for others and their views. It's the virtue that allows us to get along together even when we find it sort of difficult or even impossible to respect the other person or their opinion.
Right, so mere civility does not imply respect. It's compatible with contempt, rudeness even.
A lot of people will find being spoken to with mere civility sort of rude in the extreme. So it is a virtue, however, of tolerance, but tolerance in its old, dare I say, medieval sense of putting up with the thing that we acknowledge to be an evil. So right, today we talk about tolerance as a kind of, sort of celebration of diversity, but I think that's sort of precisely wrong. That we don't, by tolerating, we don't celebrate, nor indeed do we really accept. Nevertheless, we sort of put up with, we commit to suffering. And so I would argue that a key component of mere civility is the toleration of others' incivility.
Okay, thank you. But look, what about universities, turning to these now? I mean, even if mere civility is sufficient for society generally, doesn't academic discourse requires something a bit stronger? Because academic discourse, it's argued, is governed by norms peculiar to itself, norms of rationality and truth-seeking. And people who violate these norms, cranks, deniers, and so forth, are legitimately excluding. That's just part of ordinary disciplinary gatekeeping. Yeah? Kathleen, would you agree that there's a distinction to be drawn between free speech and academic freedom specifically?
Yes, I think obviously so, because it's what basically underlies the justification of the university system. What I'm about to say has got nothing to do with law, it's to do with culture, but academic freedom presumably is the freedom to explore questions from an academic, with an academic attitude, whatever that amounts to, but it's going to classically would have involved applying certain kinds of methodology, a certain kind of attitude of curiosity, objectivity as far as you can manage it, and so on. And also refraining from engaging in certain kind of rhetorical maneuvers, trying to win arguments through unfair, extra heavy means or ad hominems. And I just want to offer a few observations in relation to what Teresa's just said. Philosophy as a discipline when I joined it, and I think this might ring a few bells for you too, Ed, but maybe not for the younger philosophers who are here. When I joined philosophy, it was by normal standards incredibly rude as a discipline. I mean, people would behave in all sorts of extremely peculiar ways. Piers Ben was in the first philosophy department I ever was in, but I'm not talking about him. But so people would like strike their foreheads in disgust. They would turn away and cross their arms and look down, and they would frown. Everybody was frowning. They would they would look ostensibly. As soon as phones came in, everybody was looking at their phone or doing their emails while they were, listening. But they would still come up with absolutely devastating objections, even at the time that they were looking at their emails. So it was a very intimidating, hostile atmosphere. And then I don't know, I can't even remember when, but 2013, the Society for Women in Philosophy put out this big sort of behavioral code that universities had to sign up to. You had to have a badge on your department saying that you'd signed up to it, and it was all about being nice, because this atmosphere was dissuading women from entering the profession. They could not, I understood, because I used to be terrified of engaging with some of these people. My heart would go out of my chest with fear. So I sort of saw the point, but so then things got a lot nicer, and people started saying things like, "That's a very interesting question. Could you tell me more about that?" Instead of saying, "I have 6 objections, and I'm going to start with the first." So things got a lot more benign and sweet, and the philosophy got a lot worse, like a lot worse. Paradoxically, at the same time, the very same people bringing this in were the people that ended up attacking me very viciously, full of ad hominems on the internet. So at a distance, these people can be exceptionally vicious, even though they demand sort of enhanced standards of politeness and niceness in the face-to-face. So I just offer that as an observation of how this stuff works in practice.
Right, that's interesting. So maybe the problem is not that we've become less civil, it's that we've become too civil. Or civil in the wrong way.
Civil in the wrong way, I guess.
Okay. Simon, would you agree that you're also a philosopher? Have you noticed similar tendencies in the States?
Yeah, I still think the best question is here are 6 objections, each of which not only undermines your position, but would indicate you must be a total moron to have ever contemplated it. No, I think a lot of philosophy remains quite combative and highly polarized. I think it's a good example of a discipline where you do have a lot of polarization, but it actually can function in a really positive way. I've also been torn about these norms. On the one hand, I have had a lot of female students tell me how difficult it is to break into a conversation, how the men are always cutting them off. And when I step back and watch, I go, they're right. And that is a problem. But at the same time, we can go way too far, and there's this sort of temptation to say to the female students, rise to the occasion, come on, you got this. But then, one doesn't want to exclude them from the whole space of giving and asking for reasons. So, very difficult problem.
Yeah, so what are the underlying causes of this cultural shift that we've noticed? You've suggested maybe the entry of women into the academy. Okay, all right, sorry.
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, but it's often seen as a consequence of the internet and digital technology more generally. Eli, this is something you've written quite a lot about. How has the internet changed the way we talk to one another? Has it made us less civil or more civil? Or
Thank you for the question. Let me start perhaps by saying that it must be a historic first that on the issue of civility, an Israeli scholar is lecturing in British audience. Given the cultural differences. But yes, the internet has an impact. But technology has always been blamed. Every generation of technology, there was television, there was radio, there was the film, there was the phonograph. There's always kind of like, it affects the children negatively, it affects the adults negatively. So what else is new? And it is true that the internet has coarsened dialogue, interaction because of several factors, and one of them is anonymity. It's much easier to be nasty to somebody if you don't sit on their couch, so to speak. And we can already see that Zoom is more civilized because you actually see the person and see each other, and so you have more of a personal connection. The internet also makes it possible, social media, possible for like-minded people to generate a bubble and to be we versus the others, the them. and therefore that kind of tension rises. There's also the almost commercial interest on the internet to get clicks, to get attention, to be an influencer, to make money thereby, or companies and platforms, so there's an incentive to sensationalizing. Now comes the question, what about the future? Is AI going to make things worse on kind of like social media on steroids, or is it going to make it actually better? And there are two scenarios here possible. The first one is that AI is actually going to make it better. And people have already in studies shown that they think that AI is too polite to us. It kind of like, think of Alexa, yes sir, yes, what can we do for you? You're so right, etc. So there's a certain obsequiousness in there, a certain agreeableness to it, and people like a little bit more of a pushback than they get. But that can be programmed in, presumably, and people can have choices of an agreeable Alexa or a disagreeable Alexa. So then there are studies that show that in academic discussions, AI actually provides diversity of opinion where the experts kind of tend to agree. So for example, in climate change, where there's a certain orthodoxy, let's say, politely.
Just keep your microphone close, because it's...
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, on climate change, that actually using AI as an additional participant in a discussion of experts actually broaden perspectives, because AI cannot be so easily deplatformed. And there've been now people have also observed that AI actually, children who use AI actually behave more politely because the AI treats them more politely. On the other hand, children become more assertive because they can command the AI, do this, tell me that, and so they develop the same style with their buddies. Now, perhaps to conclude, in a way, at present, commercial companies have an interest in having a relatively neutral in tone, neutral in style, neutral in content, neutral in emotional intensity, because they want to broaden the user base. But that does not necessarily mean that the same will be true in the future when there's more competition, and therefore companies could differentiate their AI product, or within their product give people different options. So you can have the in-your-face AI or the love thy neighbor AI. And if any history is the guide, people like, and look at ourselves, people are likely to choose the more aggressive form, the in-your-face AI, more than the love thy neighbor AI.
Thank you. We'll come back to AI in a moment, because Simon is going to demonstrate some of his work with AI. But let's just stick to the internet. I mean, it's often said that it's had this balkanizing effect on intellectual life, the creation of echo chambers or silos. And I've certainly noticed that since setting up CAF. I find that on X, I mean, the X algorithms obviously have us down as an extremely far-right organization. So we're always being bombarded with, things that it's assumed that we'll like. And I can see that, there is this pressure to speak to what's assumed to be your audience and not to engage with other audiences. Do you notice that in Teresa?
Well, just say, I think, one of the ways in which the internet, or specifically social media, might exacerbate this kind of feeling of civility crisis is precisely the kind of problem of context collapse. So I think very much that, I think in the sort of thing that Kathleen was discussing is the fact is academic philosophy, as practiced in British and American departments, is the norms of that are quite different to the norms of other disciplines. So my first job post-PhD was as a postdoc in a humanities center. And I remember going along to the interdisciplinary seminar and afterwards being sort of told off by one of my colleagues, an anthropologist, by saying that I'd really come off as very harsh. And I thought that was very odd because, you know, I'm really mild by the standards of my own departments. But I think maybe partly what's happened is this attempt to make universal the norms of particular academic disciplines. So imposing norms on philosophy that are not sort of at home there. I mean, but to speak also to what you've just mentioned, Edward, this problem of social media and as exacerbating homophily, so the attraction of like to like. And one of the things I thought about in mere civility was, well, civility is the virtue that helps us tolerate the disagreeableness of disagreement. But the problem of a lot of these social media now is that they try to spare anyone the disagreeableness of disagreement by only projecting to them, sort of projecting what they say to the people who will be like-minded. Sort of we preach always to the choir. That makes us ever more intolerant of the realization that there are people out there who disagree with us. Right, and so that disagreement, the existence of it, feels ever more threatening, and exacerbates this sort of sense of outrage.
Yeah, I mean, Felice, let me bring you in, because you said in an email to me that in your work with students across the UK, you've noticed in recent years that there have been fewer eruptions and tensions, but that you're not sure this is a sign of health. You think perhaps it's a sign that the different tribes have become ever more sequestered and are just not talking to each other at all. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess at my university we have the arts building where the art students hang out and they dress in a certain way and they talk to each other in a certain way. And then you have the business building where the business students are differently minded and talk in a different way. And you have the science building. And I think part of what's happened is that, you know, various student institutions will have various of those groups in them, and then they kind of talk to each other within those groups, but don't really cross-pollinate that much. And I think actually one of the things about the internet is that it seems like a lot of people are much more combative and willing to engage, you know, and see more disagreement on the internet. So even though we are in kind of internet echo chambers, we still get a whiff of what the other side are talking about, but in a kind of distanced way where we can see that like other people hold these opinions over here. And I think it actually has kind of a reverse effect where then in person, people are much more sort of meek and think that their, you know, opponents will be the kinds of things they've seen online. And then in person, you know, there's complete silence. And I actually know a lot of people who might be more contrarian and go up against orthodoxies who are much more brave about that on the internet than they are in their seminars. And I think as one of perhaps the women who's prone to talk over other people in class, I think, you know, it's a hard thing because often those people who are being really obnoxious and talking too much or talking over people, they're the people who've done the reading. And the people who call for kind of civility and want to like, oh, and can't we all be a little bit nicer to each other, are more likely to be the people who are not as prepared for class and not really up for any kind of devil's advocate argument going on in class. So I think it's a bit, you know, I'm always skeptical that what's really going on here is that those people feel sort of disempowered by louder voices, especially in the kind of crisis of literacy we seem to have in universities.
Yeah, anyone else on, I mean, Eli, as co-chair of the Columbia Academic Freedom Council, have you noticed any change in the culture among students in the last few years?
I think I'm going to go with Felice. That is, the verbal interaction has become milder, but the online interaction has become harsher and sharper. But I would have a problem with kind of making being so sure that things have become worse today. There's always a tendency to think of a golden age where things were. I remember when I was basically in Felice's situation, kind of like graduate student, and here I was, based on something that I've written. They invited me to the economics department of the University of Chicago. I was at Harvard at the time, and they invited me, and I flew me in. It was a great honor. I flew me in, and there was a stretch limo at the airport, and I kind of came to the seminar, and there was Gary Becker Nobel Prize winner, George Stigler Nobel Prize winner, Milton Friedman. I mean, the whole thing was there. Richard Posner. I gave the introduction to my talk, and then they kind of like viciously started to argue with each other. Totally forgot about me. 45 minutes or an hour later, they were still arguing with each other, and I was just kind of, in a way, the catalyst for their own internal disagreements. And it kind of reminds me also of another famous academic, Henry Kissinger, who said the reason why academic disputes are so vicious is that the stakes are so low. And if you think about it, academia, sometimes I'm surprised that there is not more incivility. Think about it. I mean, people come from all over the world, different cultures, they're different age groups, they're different everything. They're typically young, and therefore they're kind of somewhat disoriented. They're still developing from leaving home. They are from different disciplines with different types of perspectives. They tend to be, when kind of, let's say, adult academics, they've selected this because they're more individualistic. Sometimes they're more difficult. They want to be smarter than anybody else. I mean, these are all the ingredients of a very uncivil type environment. And so, if anything, why are universities not more incivil than they already are?
Yeah, and I think you could add to that a point that came up earlier, which is that they are in intensely competitive environments, and much more so than they used to be. So there's a real incentive for people to destroy each other, quite frankly, in order to get the competition out of the way. And even if they're not, I'm not saying it's a conscious plan, but then not everything that people do is conscious. So I actually don't think the stakes are low. With PhD students, they put thousands of pounds of their money in and years of their life. They watch peers go into career ladders that they can't get to now, and they're over-specialized. If they came out now, they wouldn't be able to do anything. So the stakes are actually enormously high. And to stand in front of a group of peers and be humiliated because your argument isn't very good at that stage of your life is a crushing experience. And I'm not surprised that there's a sort of psychological tendency to want to remove the possibility of being humiliated in front of your peers by insisting that everyone gives you a nice experience, which seems to be the way it's going.
Yeah, I just want to, maybe get a perspective also from some people who've been in academia longer, but it seems to me that all the viciousness kind of just morphs to outside of the academic disputes, that people are less likely to kind of disagree with each other on points of academic dispute. And there's a bit of a, I notice this in seminars especially, that there's kind of a yes and approach to what discussion is. It's like someone adds a point and then someone else says, that's a great point, I think such and such, and I'm going to add this, and everyone kind of goes around in a circle and adds things, and you're not really encouraged to kind of pick apart anything another student has said. But then, all of this competitiveness that could kind of be something we compete about on the grounds of our kind of academic disagreements, instead morphs into kind of competition on external factors, like who's gone to the most conferences, or who's done the most other things.
Yeah, on the competitiveness, it is the sad fact that we're probably overproducing in certain fields people who have absolutely no job prospects, subsequently are very kind of minimal. So we're creating an overeducated, underemployed class of people, which is a prescription for really kind of academic proletariat with a lot of anger and a lot of ability to express its anger well and to magnify it. And so in some ways we are over expanding the academic environment, and not necessarily because of this to assist students, but maybe to assist the faculty itself. We need research assistants, we need teaching assistants. We just need people hanging around us to help in our research. And there's a certain selfishness here by various professions to oversupply.
So there's the overproduction of PhDs for sure, but there's also a kind of indifference to the health of the academic sort of institutions of which we are. So I'm a person who's lucky enough to have a permanent job. I won that competition, but I often sort of think about, okay, well, what are my duties now to those who are in positions of precarity or who are below me within this academic hierarchy? How can I ensure their well-being, but also ensure the kind of health of the institution for which I'm part? And I think a lot of my frustration comes from the sense that my fellow academics are not caring about that enough. They don't think about the duties that they have towards the people beneath them in the academic hierarchy, and they don't think at all about sort of the costs of their behavior on social media or in the public sphere for the health of universities as institutions that are meant to sort of persist even when we are gone. So that I feel quite pessimistic about.
I mean, I think from philosophy's perspective when I was there, which things may have changed, there was a concern about this exploitation and overproduction problem, but it manifested itself as guilt. So people in permanent positions would sort of cosset younger scholars. Vulnerable younger scholars was always the phrase, and kind of make pets out of them. In fact, there was a blog, which might even still exist, called Philosopher's Cocoon. And the idea was that young, vulnerable scholars would be cocooned in this from the outside world, from the vicious outside world. And there was, it was a culture from about 2013 to 2021 at least. And of course, it produced, I don't even blame them, but young PhD students, youngish PhD students, who were completely vicious in their attacks on anyone who tried to pull them out of their cocoon or who confronted them with a worldview they didn't like. So, and then they were protected, usually protected. So in my experience, there'd be people misbehaving on the internet, younger scholars misbehaving on the internet, and their supervisors would storm in to back them up immediately. So I agree with you that we're not taking the health of people being exploited underneath, lower down the ladder seriously, but it's not necessarily in the most superficial of mental well-being ways.
Absolutely.
Let's just changing the subject a bit. So, technology is often blamed for the so-called crisis of civility, but might technology also hold answers? And Simon has been working on an AI tool, I hope I've got that right, for encouraging civil conversation. And he's even brought it along to demonstrate. So would you like to? Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to everyone here. Okay, let me put it in here. It's such an honor to talk to you all and to get to show you a little bit. Okay, let's do it this way. It's such an honor to talk to you all and get to talk to you a little bit about this work. I'm not going to take too much time away from you. But anyhow, this is the platform. It's known as Sway. And while I was listening to earlier talks, I thought I wanted to send an optimistic message, so I retitled my talk, "The Kids Are All Right, at least when they're one-on-one." So I'll tell you just very briefly a little bit about where this whole project comes from. So I was working at Carnegie Mellon University, and I noticed the same thing. I moved there in around 2018, and all these papers that had formerly created tremendous discussions were just falling flat, and I think everyone had that experience. So I started to get interested, and I began to survey my students anonymously. And I just want to show you just a couple of quotes of things they said. Now, they sent these to me as anonymous text, and I've had them rendered by some AI voice actors.
At school, I knew that I shouldn't ever try to talk about controversial topics.
When my parents sent me to CMU, they told me to stay silent about controversial topics.
I don't support certain liberal ideologies, but I cannot and will not ever let anyone except for my closest friends know that.
So these are not at all cherry-picked. I have hundreds of them. And you might hope that outside of the classroom, students would find a space to have these kinds of challenging discussions. But instead, they're actually much more likely to reflect like this student.
When I was talking to my boyfriend about affirmative action and racism, I stated a different view just to play with the idea and try to understand it. He attacked me and said he couldn't even respond or try to explain it to me without being super upset.
To which I say, dump him. You need an intellectual peer. So these sorts of results really were very, very concerning to anyone who cares about education. And I decided I would create a class that was devoted to nothing but the very topics that we were supposed to not be talking about, and called it Dangerous Ideas in Science and Society. And so this really covered a lot of material, including the speech climate itself on campus, and things like genetic engineering, of course, a chestnut in philosophy, abortion, but then we also talk about medical assistance in dying for psychiatric patients, the gun debate, whether or not it's possible to change your race using a wonderful article, and then, of course, the problem of evil. And this is just a sort of taste of the sort of things that we covered in this. So why do I teach them? The reason was because when I asked the students why they were taking my class, they would tell me things like this.
It meant a lot to me to have an environment.
Excuse me.
It meant a lot to me to have an environment where I could be honest instead of evasive, straightforwardly disagree with someone, and still be able to talk to them outside of class without fear of retaliation.
So what I was really struck by was how well this worked in class. So we've heard a bit today about the data from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression about how comfortable students are. And you can see I replicated it pretty closely at CMU there. It's only, 8 to 19% of students saying they're comfortable across these contexts. But in this class that I was teaching, we completely transformed those numbers, which is partly why I want to call it The Kids Are All Right. So we were left with these really remarkable feedbacks from students. And the question was, of course, could we do it at scale? I was teaching only 200 students, and it took me 15 teaching assistants to do it. And so this led to the question, it was around the time GPT-4 was really dazzling people with what it could do. Could it not just be a productivity tool, but something that we use to help connect over our deepest disagreements? So I'll just show you a couple of examples from it. We try to do 2 levels of AI assistance here. The first we call charitable rephrasing. This is when you send a message that's perhaps needlessly hostile, maybe it has a passive-aggressive eye roll emoji or something like that. We can detect that and then propose a message that you might want to send instead. And in fact, most people happily accept that message. The aim is to capture the content, the valuable thing that was worth discussing, but without the needless invective. And then by far the star of the show is the AI guide, which functions as a facilitator, not the star of the show, but to try and help the students talk to each other. So a couple of things. Sway is not a free speech platform. While I do support free speech in other contexts, for this purpose it's actually not quite appropriate. So no slurs will ever be transmitted on the platform. No mere insults, that is insults that don't even attempt to forward the conversation, and similarly for personal attacks. The reason why these are all blocked is because they will undermine the very possibility of engaging with someone who disagrees with you, and that is the fundamental aim of the platform. So imagine you want to give your students an assignment where they're going to talk about the conflict in Israel-Palestine. It begins by eliciting their views, and for this I'll assume the position of disagreeing, and I'll have my colleague Nick, who couldn't be here today, agree. So what we'll do, I'll just show you a couple of the features running. So you can imagine at the beginning of a conversation, here we go. Nick might start, so why do you support the Zionist genocide in Gaza? Not the most helpful way to begin a discussion like that, but you can see there Sway suggests, do you support the existence of Israel? And if so, how do you justify the deaths of so many innocent women and children? Much better. And we can see the same thing on the other side here. I'm not picking on just one side. So you can say, well, maybe if the Palestinians stopped attacking innocent Israelis, there could finally be peace. Ever think of that? And then a passive-aggressive eye roll, like I mentioned. Peace between Israelis and Palestinians will only be possible if the Palestinians stop targeting Israeli citizens, and it's important to address this core issue much, much better. So you can imagine here 2 students, and in this discussion, some historical questions have become, and Simon says, how can you ignore that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people? Nick says, well, it wasn't until 1948, and here you can see for the first time the AI facilitator jumping in. So it's an agent, you don't need to call it, it's just in there in the background trying to see if we can deepen the discussion. And here it said, it's good to see you both engaging. Could you explain what gives Israel a stronger claim to the land? Now you can see that next one there was, I asked for help. I said, hey Guy, could you give us some historical context? Now, I'll just show you a couple of examples. So this is certainly not a sycophantic AI. It's really modeled on, me. And one of the criticisms I got before I left CMU was that I was overly tolerant of student suffering. And I believe that has lived on in Guide here. So here you can see calling out Spencer. I need to address this tone immediately. So this is a de-escalating thing. He called people who get abortions evil, engaging in child sacrifice. And can say, let me be direct. If you believe abortion is morally wrong, you need to make the case with reasons. So we have a lot of these sorts of examples. And then, of course, it says, well, here are some substantive positions you could engage with from the conversation so far. Very, very helpful. We can also help it to challenge implicit assumptions. So you can imagine Kate here saying, well, a fetus is a member of the species Homo sapiens, which indeed it is. And Guy jumps in and then gets the partner, Mary. Kate is pressing on a biological point here. A fetus at any stage is biologically human. Human DNA is not an alien. You're distinguishing between barely alive and something else. But what is the criterion you're using? We can also detect the assumptions that people hold that they use to make their inferences, but which usually go unstated, and they're often where the problems. So you can hear, you're arguing that a newborn has experienced life while a fetus hasn't. Well, what constitutes experiencing life? Great question. I'm very proud of guides sometimes. Another thing it does is it watches closely for students' opinions drifting and calls them out on it and asks, what made you change your mind? Which is a very powerful way to get these discussions to go deep. There's a tremendous move towards agreeableness. And students, actually at the beginning of every discussion, Guide begins by announcing, Simon agrees, Nick disagrees. And the reason for that is because although they answered a survey only seconds earlier, once they get into a room together, they immediately falsify their own views. So this is just to get along with each other. Okay. So again, timing. I'll just say a couple of things we discovered here. First of all, I think this must be a fear many liberal professors have, which is that their students actually don't understand a damn thing about the theses that they assert, no matter how much moral confidence they have, and we discover that over and over again. I'll just tell you one last thing here. We also see, I believe, the light of reason shining here. So this figure under pre-chat is showing you the distribution of opinions on the statement there's a strong possibility that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election. And you can see there's around half of them who agree and half of them who disagree. After discussion, every single one of them is on strongly disagree. Maximum convergence to the strongest possible disagreement. We see less dramatic but still similar moves when discussing the concept of a species, female genital mutilation, whether we should respect it, and so on and so forth. So this is an example of an AI, I hope, which is not at all sycophantic, not there to make you feel good, there to challenge you, to make your discussions go deeper, and to help you connect with people you disagree with. Last thing I'll mention, every chat is between students who disagree with each other. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. No, I won't say that. I'll ask you to emulate the fearsome philosophers that Kathleen was talking about, and say what you think. Do you think this holds out a possibility of?
I've got a question about it, really. So initially, when you mentioned it, I thought, oh God, because I really generally hate the insertion of AI into interpersonal exchanges for all sorts of reasons. Then I thought, oh, it's quite good in terms of just helping people understand how they might rephrase things helpfully. But then why does it have a bit where they actually start to offer possible arguments? That seemed to absolutely change the game from something that now they are learning what society has already decided are the acceptable answers here. So what's the thinking there?
Generally speaking, it's pretty reluctant to provide arguments for the students. I think in the context of that particular chat, it might have been that student really needed a bit of help to sort of get that discussion going. But generally speaking, it is very reluctant to think for you. Rather, it's going to kind of demand reasons of you. So it's really like an sort of demanding and hopefully inspiring philosophy professor.
This was great. But we've had discussions about that at Columbia too, and some experiences that I can relate to. The first one is the criticism is, well, we do this only because the Trump administration looks over our shoulder, and so we want to give them something, so we do this. Okay, let's get this program, and so that we can check off and say, we did this, we did this, we did that. So there's that. A second problem is that on the high school level, where there are some, I don't know if yours or something similar, students are very strategic, and so they have discovered that that since universities are now looking for evidence for somebody who is engaged with other contrarian views, let's give them something, the admissions committee, to look at, and so they participate in this, not because they want to participate, but because they want to check a box of good behavior, and so there's a really strategic application. And that breeds a certain cynicism, in fact, of kind of the whole process. And thirdly, and lastly, there's the question raised, yes, sure, this is great, but it's kind of outside of the normal, regular academic enterprise of the university. And in some ways, it's like a bit of a civility nature park, apart from the main institution that is much dirtier and industrial and messy, and it reduces the pressure on improving the classroom and improving the physical interaction by giving them some technology tool to play with.
I guess I found it profoundly depressing to look at it in how low level discourse there seems to be on a lot of these issues. And I guess my thought process, similar to Kathleen, I thought it was strange to have kind of bullet point lists of potential facts that might be relevant in this context, because it seems to be kind of the opposite of, I guess, the curiosity and the idea that when someone challenges you on a point and you don't know the answer, that's a profoundly embarrassing experience. And you then go, back to your library and you read a bunch of books on it and you try to figure out why you were stumped by a question or by a challenge by another student. And it seems to me that the part that's missing is an idea that what's actually really missing is the courage to do any of that on your own, and to be able to be mean to each other, to be able to say, to be able to just destroy someone's argument in person, and have that be not just a sort of a polite, tap on the shoulder, but be a profoundly embarrassing experience that improves students' character in a real way. I'm guessing that some of these examples also are because of the topics are kind of on the nose. So these are issues where people have a certain kind of argument, and there are things you can put in. But I guess I worry about telling students that they don't actually need to be brave or to be to kind of step out of line in order to get the education they deserve. But yeah, that's kind of.
Well, yeah, I'd want to hear from Simon. Sort of, does this translate then into different in-class interactions? Because I suppose maybe I share your worry about the displacement of disagreement, and say, okay, well, I can handle disagreement in this context with these guide rails and with the hope that it's eventually going to lead to some kind of convergence.
Yes. So I'll say first of all, the aim is not to get people to agree at all. That might happen, but it's just a side effect of the exchange of reasons. And I'll just say one thing on that pattern. The most common convergence isn't two people take a step towards each other. It's one of them stays put and the other comes closer. There's some recognition of the stronger arguments. Now, I am getting a real object lesson in why I shouldn't put too many damn words on my slides, because I'm pretty convinced if I let you read those interventions more closely, it wouldn't strike you that Guide was providing the arguments. What it was doing was, here we had a student who was refusing to engage, who was resorting to name-calling. And it was saying, here are the earlier points that your partner made. Which of them are you going to engage with? Which is, I think, a really terrific intervention. So that's certainly true. Now, onto the question about in class, what it does in person. I really don't, I think we shouldn't denigrate text communication. I think this idea that face-to-face in the flesh, that's the real thing. I think that's a really bad idea in general, but especially when we're having an intellectually and perhaps emotionally or morally challenging discussion. Text invites reflection. It is the most common feedback we get from students. Not how much they love the AI, but that they loved that they had time to gather their thoughts and to think about how to express them. So these are discussions where I think we see a lot of boldness. Now, the question of what happens when they move into the classroom. We've had a couple of instructors who have used it in the class. I generally am kind of reluctant to have students staring at their screens in class. But the reason given was that they couldn't get the students to talk in a seminar. And so a wonderful professor had them, all right, we'll start with the 25-minute chat on sway. You're talking to someone else in this room, just quietly sitting there typing. And then 25 minutes later, she says, close the screens. And she said the whole room just came to life. Because the first stupid thought that comes into your head got tested before you had to talk to people. You had a chance to rehearse some ideas and build some actual confidence. So it's not just the students who have the sufficient chutzpah to dominate the discussions, but actually everyone being involved. So I think that, yeah.
Okay, look, I think we should open it up to the floor. Some questions, please. Yes, Nigel, isn't it? Yeah, the gentleman in the middle.
Oh, thanks, that was really interesting. Do you think that the non-verbal aspects of the voice have an important role to play in discussion? We've talked a lot about free speech within the academic context, and as I see it, we've neglected the expressive element of free conversation, the way somebody's actually allowed to be who they are, they're authentic, speaking through their own voice. And obviously if you're shaping their voice through choice of words, that's one thing, and you're doing it in a non-auditory medium. But from my experience of podcasts is that the best things that I've learned through having amazing interactions with a whole series of philosophers have almost always been non-verbal. It's not just what people say, it's how they say it, their tone of voice, whether they're ironic, whether they really care about it, whether they're still exploring an idea or they just... I interviewed one person who will be nameless, who's quite a famous psychologist, sort of philosopher, who obviously had got it all worked out and just gave like little chunks, almost like you're giving us chunks, without thinking. It was the blank eyes, it's just like rehearsed ideas. That's very different from thinking on your feet, which is what I would say you're trying to encourage in philosophy particularly. We want live thought, not just dead dogma regurgitated. So part of that is it being authentic and coming from the person's personality, not just saying this is the kind of thing that will get you points in a seminar.
Thank you. Let's have another couple of questions and take them together.
I think the discussion about AI used here raises a wider point for free speech, in that the way that you've got the students talking there and the kind of point we were making, which you said wasn't really an issue here, that AI was suggesting things, bringing up its own opinions. I think in the wider world, this has the implication that people these days will generally have these discussions with an AI. Like all the students these days are learning by talking to AI chatbots. And so people will be testing their ideas against AI and getting pushback from AI. But then we've got that all these AI companies, they're all full of AI safety experts. And, they're creating the tools for people to censor the AIs. And so the AIs are you've probably all heard, all the AIs are terribly left-wing. And so if we're then getting people testing their ideas against AI, all the pushback they're getting, all these ideas, and I imagine it will affect Sway as well, they're inherently left-wing. So how then do we disagree? How do we have civility in a world where we've got these omnipotent gods which are all left-wing?
Okay. Any responses to those two questions? Either of them?
On the first one, going to Simon's issue of the AI in the classroom, the sway in the classroom. This is truly depressing, I must say. Not because it's a great tool, but depressing about the future of the university. You think about the university starting 2,300 years ago, Alexandria, the kind of in the library university, and that created the university system, which basically is production of information, distribution of information, and storage of information. And that was a very personal type enterprise. But now electronics is there, and electronics can do it better. So what is left for the university's function? It's the mentoring and the peer-to-peer. And now you're taking kind of the AI and things, tools like that are taking that away too. Why then go to the university? You can teach yourself, it's only the credential then, because you can teach yourself the information with AI in a way much better and more convenient, and certainly much cheaper, at least speaking for American private universities. And so if you take away that personal interaction, what have you got left? I can respond to the other one, but I don't want to monopolize. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is sort of responding to Nigel. And to Simon, I'm a huge fan of the written word. I never say anything against it, but I'm also a fan of the spoken word. And I think that maybe what Felice and others are getting at is this kind of the importance of, I mean, I think, Nigel, you said thinking on your feet, but I also think about the seminar as a space in which we sort of invite students and teach them to think aloud. Because the idea that you come to class or you come to a debate knowing what your position is, I think that's often wrong. I think very often students don't know what their position is, and sort of they discover what they think. The discussion that takes place between people is a process of revelation in which we reveal ourselves to ourselves and sort of interacting with the other. And that's kind of what I would worry about. I mean, my own sort of sense of the university, and again, it's a medieval one, is that it's not just about the pursuit of truth, it's about the pursuit and creation of knowledge in community with others. So that's why I'm sort of skeptical of this conflation of free speech and academic freedom, which I think often we get in these discussions. I think the aspect of community is important, and what we do in the room together when we sort of disagree and see each other face to face is important, and we don't want to just displace that activity.
I absolutely agree with that, and I would also like to add that I think I'm not a historian, but I seem to remember that what people, the old model of the relationship between the student and the university professor or lecturer was one of an interpersonal reaction, an interpersonal interaction where if it went well, the lecturer, who was in a position of intellectual authority, would recognize the contribution of the student and be impressed by it. The student would feel, wow, I said something clever today, and they noticed, and they would feel that was important. Now, that may never, for some students that never happened. For some students that happened once or twice, particularly with universities where everyone's extremely withholding with their praise. But when you got it, you knew that something important had happened, and it was a part of your formation. And what I find incredibly depressing about the AI model, which no doubt goes along with, not necessarily this tool, but the more like talking to ChatGPT, you're talking to a robot. There's literally nobody there at the other end. And they can tell you that you're clever and that was a great point or whatever. They can give you lots of validation in any way you want, but it's not real life. It's not human. And it's a simulacrum. And every company is going, for the next however long, is going to try and persuade us very, very hard that this is just as good as real life. But it's not. And I think the trouble is we've created a vacuum in the university system because we've got rid of that kind of special idea of the special relationship because it's seen as kind of coercive and oppressive, and we've tried to get rid of the hierarchies, and it's not fair because not everyone can experience the same thing. So all of that kind of personal stuff that lots of people did want from a university, they don't get anymore.
So many great questions. So I just want to say, first of all, I would never deny that all the nonverbal aspects of communication are deeply important, and learning to engage in person and thinking together in a public way is obviously, I would just never deny it. It's obviously very valuable. I wish for my students. I try to teach them how to do it. But I also think there's tremendous value to having a low-stakes private space where students can try out ideas for size, where they don't have to worry about performing for anyone else around. And I actually think that is promoting the very, very thing that you prize and cherish so much, students thinking for themselves. Now, sorry. The AI, so is it left-wing? Well, just today I saw it criticizing youth gender medical treatments. defending the right to own a gun on the basis that you have a right to defend yourself, and as you saw it just there, insisting that a human fetus is biologically human. There's no indication. But one thing we have done is operationalize the notion of AI bias. And so if I could just very briefly explain. So what we do is we get a transcript, say, where two people are debating abortion. We have a pro-lifer and a pro-choicer. And then we recruit people on the internet who identify as partisans on one side or the other of that debate and get them to review the transcript and ask them how biased against your side do you think it was. And the operationalization is it's okay if they say it's biased as long as both people on both sides say it was biased against me. And indeed, that's exactly what we have been seeing. In as much as people think it's biased, they think it's biased against them, but so does their partner. So it left and right seem to react in the same way there. Last thing I wanted to say. Oh, okay, no, I'm being.
Yeah, I guess just on the nonverbal communication, I think it's also crucial, as Kathleen said, that it's non-personal, and that that element of yes, when you then get that great point from your professor, it's really great, but the reason for that is that it's rare. I mean, the reason that getting that kind of positive reinforcement is because you know you've worked for it. I think often the best professors are ones who recognize that kind of mentorship relationship you have where they know more than you do, and they're able to sort of play a form of devil's advocate with your positions, if that's what you need, where they're able to kind of reinforce, but do it on a personal level, because I think when that great point comes, it's often because you've almost verged on having an original point. And I think the thing that is often missed out in the discussion about kind of academic freedom and free speech in universities is that what we really want is that by the end of a university degree, maybe by the end of postgraduate degree, but that students are starting to develop personal opinion, like things that are unique to them. And often I find that a discussion becomes about, am I allowed to have, this belief on this? Am I allowed to hold this idea? Where do I fit on the spectrum from, strongly disagree to agree? And you have to fill out these forms at the beginning and end of every module you do. But that really what is needed is that we're not constantly reinforced. We're not constantly told that participation is good or that such and such. We're just expected to do our reading, to come to class, to be challenged mostly by the professor, who, if they do it kind of equally to all the students, it's not threatening. It doesn't feel horrible or like a personal attack if you know that that is just how they act. And then maybe, just maybe, you will once write an essay or make a point in class that is actually remotely original, and your professor will say, that was really great. And that's like the one moment that you live for.
Okay, a few more. Keep them short, please, if you could, because we've got quite a few.
Hello, here in the back. First of all, Kathleen, you've made me a bit sad because ChatGPT has been telling me how clever I am for months. And now that I know it's not sincere, my self-esteem is really taking a hit. So when we started the University of Austin, the first 2 summers as we were preparing for the university, we ran courses in person, sort of parallel to the courses that you're offering here. We called them the forbidden courses on controversial topics. Kathleen was actually one of our instructors one summer. And it was I think it was a great warm-up experience for us as an institution, learning how to formulate the kind of culture of civil discourse that we wanted to create. What I also learned from that is that we as a culture and as universities have come to fetishize a relatively narrow set of controversial topics, and we give them just too much airtime. The purpose of the university isn't to constant kind of recycle the debates that are out there in the culture. The debates are out there in the culture. We can participate in them, and I think we have something to say about them as individuals. But what I can realize is the purpose of university isn't really debate. It's discussion or dialogue. When we bring people together, who have different opinions. At the end of discussion, we shouldn't leave with 2 different opinions. We should leave with better opinions. So thinking about intellectual humility, let's say, as the first move in discussion and debate, going into a discussion with the intention of sharing opinions that are loosely held with the hope that maybe your own opinion will shift. This is the kind of culture that we need to create. So I think this is a very impressive program that you've come up with. What I want to urge us all to do, though, is right-size this particular set of topics in terms of the space that it takes up in the academic sphere.
Okay. Yes. The hand up at the back. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, what that software is doing is not in any sense charitable rephrasing. It's just proposing a different content, which is weaker to assert. So I mean, if I say that someone is an idiot and it suggests something else, I mean, like, I'm not sure I agree. That's just changing the objection.
Thank you. That's short and to the point. Lady in the middle row. Yep. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Jan McVarish from the Free Speech Union, but I was in academia. This is partly joining together with the previous session. It does seem that there is a relationship now of mutual estrangement between academics and students, and we can have these discussions that are very much focused on academic freedom, and we sort of talk about students in a way that doesn't seem very real. I'm partly reacting to what Frank said about, and sort of thinking about all the students I ever taught. I don't know whether it includes me, that generation. I'm probably too old now, or whether it's certainly my kids. And I think, well, as adults, we do have to re-establish the relationship. It's going to have to come from us, not them. We do in order to rehumanize the academy, build those kinds of relationships. And I do think that there's something, certainly in what Arif was talking about, that needs to be taken out to students, and it needs to be given meaning in a way that students can appreciate. And I'd be very interested to know how we might possibly do that, and to actually bring adults and students, I say adults, I mean academics, but I keep saying adults, academics and students together in spaces that are not pastoral. They're not necessarily the seminar room either, but they are a kind of third space, but within the university environment.
Okay, thank you. So we've almost run out of time. So if you could just say a few final words. Thank you.
Sorry, just on that final point, I mean, I've been at Oxford now for 10 years. I would say that the most valuable thing I've done in that time is institute a kind of an extracurricular reading group in which we just sort of come together, students of all levels, so undergrad, grad, student, colleagues, postdocs, etc. We just come together and we read a short Platonic dialogue together. We read it aloud, and we stop for discussion, and there's lots of cold calling, and nobody is an expert, and that kind of sort of, it's a companion academic space, but it's so radically, it's a different kind of intellectual engagement and community than the students are getting in their lectures or in their seminars, and just having that sort of space for freedom and invention and sort of saying something just kind of off the cuff about an ancient Greek dialogue that nobody there really knows anything sort of specialist about. That's been incredible. So it's led me to think a lot about creative constraints in the creation of these kind of quasi-academic spaces, and having a kind of diversity of spaces in which students are interacting with the material and with each other and with us.
Quickly, I would say, in order to rehumanize relationship, you have to get them in physically in the building, and you have to stop doing remote learning. You have to stop putting lectures online. You have to give courses which are credit only, but they still have to take them, and in those courses you can have the creative, free-flowing conversations, because there isn't an exam at the end of it, or there's nothing they have to do. They just have to be there. You have to actually incentivize them to get in the room and not tolerate any excuses. And that is a massive shift in university culture. Like, if you can achieve that, well done. The other thing I want to say in relation to Panos is, I think you, as part of that, you need to establish a culture of being able to say that you're wrong. And that's just something that's really, really missing. So lecturers should be able to say when they've made a mistake, or when they now think that something different to they used to think. And students should be able to walk back anything that they've said in previous seminars without any cost or any kind of feeling of shame. It's actually admirable to admit it, and it's a necessary part of intellectual development. So that sort of thing.
Thank you. I'll make 2 points. The first one, kind of a dangling on the politicization of the of AI, and indeed, a few months ago, 2-3 months ago, President Trump issued this executive order that required any AI used by a federal government, which is a big government, not right now, but it's on hold, but basically, and it had to be required to be truthful and to be politically neutral, which sounds kind of good in the abstract, but if you think about it, what is the definition of truth? Truth, what's the definition of truth? Who determines it? What's the enforcement? How does it change, et cetera, et cetera? So this is one of those situations where the remedy is going to be much worse than the problem. But the solution might be, in fact, not to regulate, which is probably what the Brussels people will do, not so much to regulate the sender of the AI information, but that the recipient will have the ability to control and to filter and to screen and to select what they would like to receive and do. So it's a very different approach from the regulation of the platform, is to provide tools of self-protection to the user. Now, the other question is, what are we going to do about this on the university level? Who's responsible? And everybody's pointing to everybody else, and everybody is to blame, but of course, and they all agree on one thing, it's AI that's at fault, and technology. But the students are rambunctious, but they've always been that way, bless them. If you're not revolutionary when you're 20, when will you be? But if you're revolutionary when you're 40, that's another problem, and that gets me to the faculty. All right, and that, I think, given the fact that top administration of universities, certainly in the United States, are kind of weak and always kind of being in the business of collecting money, that's kind of their main purpose. It's really the faculty that has to provide the adult supervision. They are the mentors. They have more at stake. It's lifelong careers, presidents come and go, trustees come and go, students certainly go, but the faculty stays. They have the most at stake, and they have tenure, and they have no courage. So it's kind of giving a role model, playing the model of educators to students and to others and to society. That is the responsibility, and there are all kinds of reasons why they don't do it, and there are all kinds of ways in which can possibly encourage them to stand up and be counted.
Yeah. So I think on is it changing the content to not let people call each other idiots? I actually do think it does. And I think part of what we're talking about in the earlier panel with well-being is that I think students really need to learn that they can be called an idiot and it's not the end of the world. And I think actually often that's where it starts. We start by calling each other idiots and thinking each other are ridiculous. And then we talk for a bit, and then things become civil. And I think that's what's often lost, is that the mediation of our sort of tone happens just as much in kind of learning about what each other thinks as it can kind of be imposed. On bringing students and academics together, I think that's a really, really important point, and it's part of why I'm most grateful for the work I get to do with Living Freedom and in my own university, that actually, trying to set up, who knew, free speech events at university really gets some academics out of the woodwork. And I think it can be, and that can be incredibly sort of, it can be a really good experience to try to establish something with people who are much more senior than you and who kind of know what they're doing, and it can kind of be a mutual, give courage both ways in a lot of situations. So I think that's very important, and whether that's setting up events or reading groups. But I think the thing that really is key there is that it requires some energy from academics. It requires academics who are willing to spend their time doing that for students. I think we have a problem where academics don't like their students very much because they all think they're a bunch of sort of woke or not very well-read bunch that doesn't really put in as much effort. So I think we need to kind of just have a little bit higher expectations for each other and then try to get those things started as and where we can.
Well, I think I've heard a lot of people articulating a very inspiring, profound vision of the university, of undergraduate life, of intellectual life. But I would really suggest that we should pay very close attention to what actually happens in real student discussions. And the reality of it is most students spend most of their undergraduate careers hoping they will not be called on, hoping they will not ask a question, and feeling tremendous anxiety. So I strongly favor the idea of giving them a space where it is low stakes and they can get that practice, to then bring them into person. The last thing I just wanted to say about this was how good are humans actually at calling each other out? So I think of myself as a pretty confrontational philosopher professor. So I will, if I've got a student and we're in front of the class and they say something stupid, well, I'm not going to call them stupid, but I will point it out. And then they'll sometimes repeat the stupid thing, and I might point it out, but then I'm done. I am over, right? That is not true of the AI. It will hound them over and over and over again, because it isn't driven by this agreeableness. And I really think that could be something which might help to inspire teaching assistants and others to see how well students respond when you really challenge them and call out their bullshit. But not in a overly, I don't agree about calling people idiots. Not if you want to have a good discussion with them in any case.
Okay, thank you very much to all our panelists. Okay, look, I know you're all longing to get a drink, so I'll be really quick, I promise. So thank you all for being here. It's a real relief for those of us who teach in universities to be among people who can speak freely about these matters. It's like oxygen. We don't get much of it in our campuses. People often ask me, are things getting better or worse in universities? And the only honest answer is I really don't know. The Freedom of Speech Act has clearly been an enormous boon for us. It's got universities on a back foot legally, and the hysteria over trans seems to be finally abating a bit. But looking into the medium or long term, I feel less certain. Because what the Great Awakening showed us is how utterly supine our intellectual elite is, how ready to put its name to any old rubbish just to keep out of trouble, and it's going to take more than a change in the law to remedy that. And generally speaking, I think we can't look for salvation from legal or institutional reforms, important though these are. We have to take responsibility for our own freedom by just saying the truth as we see it, no matter whom it annoys or upsets. And that's why gatherings like these are so important, to show our oppressors that we're not on board, we're not compliant, and we hope to have many more in the future. So before we go, just a few thanks are in order to Ali Bino and his team, who've not just provided the filming, but all the technical support, to our crew at CAF and its supporters, Christina Koppel, Melissa McAdam, our digital manager, Max Belondi, our manager, Freddie Attenborough, and above all, Jonathan Platt, our event manager, who's been principally responsible for making sure that everything has run smoothly on the day. We'd like to thank the donors who've made this event possible. So the McTaggart Foundation, administered by the Free Speech Union, which exists to sponsor free debate among young people and has ensured that we've had more than 20 student delegates here. To FIRE, which has supported many of our foreign speakers to come over from the States, and the Institute of Humane Studies at Georgetown University. Above all, I'd like to thank two individuals, Ben Dilo, without whom, frankly, we wouldn't exist at all, and one other person who wishes to remain anonymous, but he knows who he is, and we're hugely grateful. But anyway, enough talking. Let's go and have a drink. Okay. Okay.